What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. One of my old good friends from a Honda dealership. I worked with him for a long time. He was our parts guy. He had this machine. He's been trying to fix it. He told me that he doesn't think it has spark, or it's an intermittent spark issue. I know it's not a real common machine anymore. It's a really common machine, but I know there's not a whole lot of them left out there because it's older and most of them are probably in the junkyard. But the same basic steps that we take here can be used on many things. First of all, I'm rocking some Bill Murray. His new album drops later today. Pretty pumped about that. So in honor of him and cranking the hog, we're gonna rock that while we work on this. First thing I'm gonna do, hook up a battery maintainer. I actually personally really enjoy electrical issues. I know a lot of people hate them, absolutely despise them, but it's one of my favorite things. As you can see, the battery is showing that it's charging, but I highly doubt we get anything out of it. I might get the voltage meter and take a reading on it just to see what it's saying. All right, I'm just using a cheap voltmeter, nothing fancy here. Disconnected the battery charger, hooked up to the battery, and you can see we're showing 12.25 DC volts, which is not great. That's not gonna be enough to start anything. We should be up around 12.8-ish. I'm gonna go ahead and hook the battery charger back up to it and let it do its thing. With the battery maintainer hooked up, checking the voltage, you can see it's rising. It is charging right now. One thing I'm noticing right off the bat, we have no dash lights in neutral. The indicator shows up for reverse, and then kind of partially in between reverse and neutral. Not that's neutral there, kind of partially in between. You get a neutral light. That could be some of our problems. The gear selection switch may not be letting it spark because it doesn't think we're in neutral. Usually with electrical problems, the best thing to do would be start at the sorcery, which would be the battery in this case, and then you trace everything towards your issue. In this case would be the spark plug. Since we have no spark, trying to look at the plug here, it looks a little bit black, running a little bit rich, which looks like they've replaced the carburetor. So none of that matters right now. We just need to make sure we have spark. And I know I just said I usually start at the source and work towards this, but I'm actually going to do that completely ass backwards today. So, but since he said there was a spark issue, I'm going to go ahead and test spark and just see what happens, just to verify if we do have a spark issue or not, to make sure we are chasing the right problem. To do that, you can take your spark plug out, keep it connected. You want to ground it on the engine, make sure it has a good ground to metal there. It grounds through the plug. We'll go ahead and turn the key on, crank it over, and see if we have any spark whatsoever. Try to zoom in here and give you a better look. There's absolutely zero spark. Now that we know that we can confirm there is no spark, I'm going to go ahead and, since I noticed, if you remember, the gear selector was not indicating neutral in the correct position, I'm going to try to get that light to come on and hold the selector in that position while I'm cranking this and see if we get any kind of spark. Okay, I've got it to where it's showing that it's in neutral. Let's see what happens. It's got good engine oil, and I do know because I picked it up, the seat was off. It has a brand new air filter in it. I went ahead and took the seat and the airbox cover off. I'm going to remove the fuel tank, and it is full of fuel. So I'm just going to pull off one of the fuel lines and let it drain down into this fuel tank. As you can see, I've got the fuel line off and the fuel is draining down into this fuel can. I also managed to soak my iWatch, Apple Watch, whatever they call these things nowadays, in fuel, so that's cool. Okay, we got the fuel drained and the tank out of the way so you guys can see a lot better what's going on down in here. You can see the wires for the stator coming out right here. They'll be coming out of the engine case, over the starter, up to the opposite side of the machine. They come out right here. You can see it splits. There's 3 yellow wires. The 3 yellow wires are going to be, they control your charging, your AC charging off of the stator. So those generally will go into your regular rectifier, which converts the voltage and regulates the voltage, converts it to DC from AC, and it regulates it to keep it from overcharging. We're not real worried about those, but I am going to do an ohm reading on those just to verify, because if the magnets come loose on the flywheel and they hit the stator, it could show some shorts to ground or something through there. That will help us verify that that has happened. But today we're going to be more focused on this white and white with red wire that come from the trigger coil or the pulse coil, exciter coil. I mean, they call it many things, but it is actually what sends the signal for spark to the CDI. We don't want to take the engine cover off yet and pull all that apart yet. We're going to try and verify the issue here first before we take all that apart, in case it is okay and there's an issue with either ground or a bad ignition coil or CDI or a connection somewhere or something like that. We want to verify the problem, not replace parts. I've disconnected the yellow wires coming from the stator. These are your AC cables that are going to control charging. The first thing I decided I'm going to do is check for continuity to ground. And to do that, using my voltmeter, I have grounded the black wire to the engine. I'm going to use, you put it on the beep setting on the meter. I'm going to check each one of these legs for continuity to ground. That would tell me that it is shorted to ground through the stator. Checking each of these, listening for a beep. And it sounds like we're good as far as being shorted to ground. And now that we've done that, I'm going to get an ohm reading. So I set my meter to the ohm setting. And we're just going to go across to each one of these legs. Looks like we've leveled out at 0.6 ohms. Check the next leg. Looks like it's right around 0.6 ohms too. Check across the other two. Looks like it's leveling out around 0.62, which sounds okay. I haven't checked the manual to see what the reading should be, but that is probably okay considering they're all around the same parameters. Next, I'm going to do basically the same thing for the white with red and white wire going into the CDI off of the exciter coil, pulse coil, trigger coil, whatever you want to call it, that sends a signal to the CDI from the flywheel for spark. To see if they have a short to ground first. Okay, I'm going to check both of these wires from the trigger coil for continuity to ground, which will tell us if there's a short directly to ground. And I'm just going to go straight to this common ground on the frame. You can see right here where all the common grounds go. Listening for a beep. We have no beeps. There's no continuity to ground on that one. Go to the next one. No beeps. That's a good sign. So I pulled up a diagram here. You can find it on page 10.9 in the service manual. And it gives you all the ohm readings for the ignition system. We're not really going to worry about the yellow wires that were all at 0.6 ohms. I think that's good. And that's on the charging side anyways. I didn't see any shorts to ground, so we're not going to worry about that. This is more what I'm concerned with, which would be the pulse coil, trigger coil. Like I said, they call it a million things. But you can see there's supposed to be an air gap of 16 thousandths to 30 thousandths. We don't know what that is because we don't have it off there yet, but we can check that later. Right now, we need to check. There should be 520 ohms in between these two connectors, and we're going to test that right now and see what we get. Okay, so we're testing the white with red and white wires at the CDI connection that are the two wires coming from the trigger coil by the flywheel. That reading was supposed to be 520 ohms, and right now we're getting 24.8, which is obviously not within spec. All right, we're going to go ahead and pull this stator cover off. There is a gasket on there. This helps keep water out. There will be no oil behind this, or there shouldn't be unless you have a bad crank seal. I'm not used to working with a camera, so sorry if you can't see shit. Pay attention when you're taking this off. There is a ground wire here that goes to the ignition coil. I'm gonna make sure and hook that back up. Also, your starter Bendix, there's a good chance it could come out with this. If you can hear me breathing in the camera like a pug, it's like that Shane Gillis joke. get all 750 bolts out of there. Pull that bad boy out. Looks like the gasket's okay. Feels like a chunk of metal. It's not good. It's not wet in there. It looks like they replaced this. Looks pretty new. That's nice. Usually those are all full of water and rusted up and stuff. You can see, oh boy. You can see the flywheel is all rusted. That's from water getting in there, moisture. That's kind of typical of Polaris. Trying to turn this over so I can see. Yeah, that's what I thought. Ah, that'll cause some issues. So if you see this bump right here, that's what the trigger coil picks up off of, and you see how rusted it is, and it looks like it's made contact with the trigger coil. You can see the scuffs and scratch marks. That's not great. It's not what you want to see. It also looks like that side over here is worn down. That's no bueno. Let's try and pull the flywheel off here. Also, if you look at the end of the crankshaft there, the bare metal where it's mushroomed a little bit, it looks like somebody has had this off of here recently. 22 millimeter will work on this nut. You want to put this nut back on before you hook your flywheel puller up to this flywheel. There is a chance, especially with Polaris with the rusty ass flywheels, when you tighten up that flywheel puller, you can actually mushroom this out into the crankshaft, and that will make your threads to where you can't get a nut on. So if you leave the nut just on there, go ahead and pull your flywheel off, and then you can take the nut off, and that'll kind of fix your threads if they mushroom at all. Alright, so I do not have a flywheel puller to work with this specific flywheel, so I'm going to run up to O'Reilly's and get, actually, hold on. Yeah, so I was going to try using a two-fingered puller and hook them in here, but I don't like that because the stator is behind there and I don't want to take any chance at hitting the stator. So I'm just going to go get a steering wheel puller from O'Reilly's, and hopefully it will line up to where I can pull it off with that. BRB. Alright, so I found a puller. You can see it boogers that up just a little bit, but the nut comes off nice, so the threads are fine. Let's pull this off and see what we're working with here. Well, not great things. You can see in here, this does have the updated flywheel to where this is sealed, so the magnets are not just free floating in here. There's a little bit of shavings in here, and you can see where the flywheel has been rubbing on the stator. I don't feel any play in the crank bearings. It's very strange. I don't know if you can see that in the picture, but you can see where it's been rubbing, and there's some metal flakes in there. That's not a good sign of things to come, but it's all fixable. This is the exciter coil, trigger coil, pulse coil, and there's a lot of stuff behind that, including chunks of something. Sorry, I had to get some rags. Just trying to wipe that off a little bit so I can see what I'm working with. I'm gonna go ahead and pull the stator out of there. The crank bearing feels fine. The stator is not moving, so I don't know why it would be rubbing unless there was just so much buildup, dirt, grime, water, rust, all that stuff in between this and the flywheel, and that's what was actually rubbing, not the actual stator itself, because it doesn't appear to be damaged. But I'm going to take it all off there and inspect it. Whenever you see Phillips head bolts inside of an engine, especially when they're rusty like this, don't even fuck around with a screwdriver. Just go ahead and grab an impact driver. See how much easier that was? And honestly, may have broke off. That'd be real sweet. One's already pre-fucked. Love that. Well, fuck. Try the old chisel trick first. get this bolt to break free. Put a little groove in it like that. Try not to slip and hit the stator. And I think it broke loose there. Yep. Make sure to pay attention to the orientation that plate comes off. You put it in backwards, it will hit the flywheel too. Stator's out of the way. Looks nice and grimy. Not what you want. Crank seal doesn't appear to be leaking, but there is an O-ring behind this cover here that can leak. Like I said though, we're focusing on the trigger coil here, which is, I'd like to find out where those chunks of metal came from. Well, guys, I don't know if you can see that or not, but the trigger coil was loose, and that probably means that the gap closed enough that it was rubbing the flywheel, and that's why we have the marks that we had. Uh-oh. It's a big chunk of metal right there. The fuck did that come off? All the gears are on the Bendix. Damn, these are all kinds of metal in here. Surely somebody did not replace a flywheel and stator on this and leave chunks of metal laying in here. There's literally nothing it could have came from. What the f... So I've already pulled out this big chunk of metal, which doesn't really look recognizable to me. And then there's another chunk right here. See if we got any other cool stuff down in here. Alright, so I just want to show you guys something. The chunks of metal, I still don't know where they came from. I'll do some digging later to find that out. But you guys see anything wrong with the trigger coil? It got hit by the flywheel. You can see a crack right along here. Also, it's dislodged right here, and the wires are all ripped out of it. This trigger coil is junk. Where did the metal chunks come from, though? Still on the search for that. But I'll go ahead. That's all junk. So, fuck all of that. Anybody have any guesses where those chunks of metal came from at all? These two big ass chunks that look like. Anyways, the flywheel. I mean, there's nowhere that they could have come off of it. Yes, it's a little bit rubbed up inside here, but it's probably fine. You can see where the trigger coil had been hitting right here for a long time, and you can see the marks where it finally wiped it out. But there's really no indications of where those metal chunks came from off of the flywheel. I don't feel where the cases have broken off anywhere. I guess I'm gonna end up pulling this cover off. I didn't want to because I don't want to take a chance at damaging the O-ring, and I didn't want to drain the engine oil. But probably need to, just to make sure that whatever's broken isn't hidden by this. So I'm just gonna pull this cover off just to feel better, check everything out. To me, it looks like something that was left over in the past. I think somebody's been in there. Obviously, we saw the flywheel had been pulled off before, and it has a new pull start housing. So somebody has done some work in there before. It's probably grenaded before, and obviously they just didn't get everything out of it. And that's probably why one of those metal pieces, since the flywheel is magnetic, probably stuck to the flywheel, and that's what wiped out the trigger coil. Also, one of the bolts on the trigger coil was already loose, so it could have just you know, moved itself and hit the flywheel. But regardless, I'm gonna try and pull that cover off. I hope no oil runs off. Hopefully the oil level is low enough that it doesn't run out of there. But I've also got plan B down here in case that does happen. We're gonna fuck around and find out. Hell yeah. Also, somebody's leg skin is right here on the exhaust. No, it's from the fender, but could very easily be leg skin. Sorry, I dropped some bolts, so I'm trying to clean them up. One fell in the oil pan. Why wouldn't it, you know? Now, let's hope that a bunch of oil doesn't come gushing out of this son of a bitch. Not a ton. Hell yeah. We can work with that, brother. I don't see anything broken, guys. I'm gonna be honest with you here. I think those chunks were from either a pull starter came apart in the past or that it had a previous flywheel incident. See, everything on here looks okay. There's no broken pieces. I'll probably go ahead and replace this crank seal while we're in there. See the cam chain here, pretty tight. That's good. The oil honestly looks like it's been changed recently, so that's also good. I don't see any missing chunks of the casting of the cases. Need to go through here and run my magnet in there, make sure to get anything out of there so we don't have this issue again. Might as well check that all those are snug while we're here. One of those came out in there, that'd be bad news bears. Tight. Tight. So we're gonna order a stator and a trigger coil. Ooh, forgot about this little problem right here. Get that to focus. See how this is worn down right here? I think it's been hitting that pickup coil for quite a while. It should be like this edge here. Unless they manufacture it that way, but I don't think they did. I'll look at a picture of a new one and see if it's like that. I don't believe it is because that looks pretty rough. So we may end up doing a new flywheel after all. This one's, it's got some, looks like some Chinese welded on it or something. Looks like Chinese welded. So I'm gonna go ahead and make sure the O-ring's okay on this, clean this surface up a little bit, and I'll put that back on there just to keep things sealed up while it's waiting on parts. And then really since we're gonna be waiting on parts, the only other thing we can do, we can't really test spark obviously, but I can go ahead and check the ignition coil resistance, check all the grounds to the ignition system, and make sure the CDI is getting 12 volts from the battery with key on, stuff like that, just to cut out any surprises after we get the parts and then we find out, oh, this is wiped out too. Hopefully the CDI is fine. You never know, sometimes things can happen when you have catastrophic failures like this. Inside this cover, there's also a bushing right here. It's a lot like a bushing on like a dirt bike fork, if you've ever been into a fork on one of those. You just want to make sure that's in good condition too. If the crankshaft does ride in that and it looks like it's okay, make sure the Woodruff key is still there and in good condition as well. When you slide that on, make sure that the Woodruff key does not cut the seal. Just rock it back and forth a little bit, you should be able to feel the O-ring lock into place like that. This is also your ignition timing plate, because if you turn this, it's going to move your pickup coil here at a different part of the rotation, which would change the ignition timing. So I'm not 100% sure on this one where the indicator is, but there will be a timing mark in here to line that up with before you tighten this up, and I'm going to do that when I figure out what the fuck it is. It's been so long since I've worked on a Polaris ATV, I don't even remember if I ever knew. But somewhere in here there will be an indicator to line up with to get the timing correct. So I'm gonna wait to tighten that down. I'm gonna look that up in the manual real quick. Just to go over with you guys a little bit of what we tested and found here to make it make a little more sense. I tested the 3 wires from the stator, you remember, and they tested okay. They all had 6 ohms. There was no short to ground or anything like that. And judging by what we're seeing here, that checks out. The stator looks okay. It's a little rough from all the rust and stuff, dirt and stuff in here, but as far as charging, what the stator does, it was working for the most part. And that's why everything tested okay. When we moved on to the white with red and the white wire, we got a low resistance, and that is because this is damaged and the wires aren't even connecting, so there was a low resistance. That's why you should do those tests before you just start digging into stuff and replacing parts, because you don't really learn what the exact problem was when you just replace parts instead of doing the test. This is like $13. So learn how to use one of these properly, and you can save yourself a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of headache for sure. But I just messaged the customer and told him that the stator and pickup coil are junk. They need replaced. They got hit by the flywheel, which is also, it's okay, but it has damage on where the pickup coil gets its signal from. That will affect the ignition timing as well. So I'd say this thing has been running rough for a while. Yeah, so that's where we're at with that. Just want to show you guys in the manual what I was talking about with the ignition timing being controlled by that plate that the stator mounts to that we just pulled off. You can see right here, this is showing a picture of it. I could not find that indicator, this little line in the casting right here, because it's so covered in rust and stuff, but I'll clean it off and I'll be able to see it. But you can see here, if you turn that plate this way, you retard the timing. If you turn it this way, you advance the timing. Obviously, we want it perfectly in line with this bridge right here. That is the indicator, and I will show that. Looking at the plate here, that mark is going to be right there. I believe you can see it now, right here. That needs to be perfectly in line with this bridge in the casting right here. So right now it's a little bit on the retarded side, kind of like myself. To my eyes, that right there is about perfect. See what the camera sees. Maybe a little bit advanced. Give it just a little bit more. Why does it look completely different in the camera than it does with my eyes? To my eyes, it looks like it's retarded over here. To the camera, kind of looks like it's a little bit advanced. We're gonna go with my eyes, okay? So now that we have the timing set with the plate here, we can go ahead and put our bolts back in and snug that up. Also, I'm kind of struggle fucking this, if you can't tell, as far as dropping shit, put bolts in. It's very hard, I've found out, to work hands-on and have a camera set up to where you can catch everything. So I give a lot more respect and credit to the guys that do this on YouTube and stuff a lot. It's a lot harder than you think it would be. Even talking, like, I keep stumbling on words because I'm trying to pay attention to what I'm doing and think at the same time, which is not one of my strong suits. So, all right, we got that plate back on there. Tighten these up with a ratchet, not an impact, because if you pull the threads out of there, you have added about 3 hours to this job. Ask me how I know. All right, got all that taken care of. Really can't do anything else until we have a new stator and pickup coil as far as down here. This goes in fat side forward. It's got a washer on the end. Make sure that's on there. Just like that. You can see it engage with the starter gear there. And then it's going to line up with this. Sorry. It's going to line up with this on this side, so it's a little funky. So just make sure you get that all lined up. There's some guide pins that make it a little easier, so just do that. And then we'll just put a couple bolts in it just to hold it on there until we get the parts, all that good shit. I do want to go through a couple things to eliminate maybe some future problems when we get the parts. We can test a few things here without needing any of the stator stuff, just to eliminate maybe some problems that we might run into when we get the new parts and go to put everything back together. This is, I believe, the connector that is supposed to go into the throttle housing, which will also cut spark at a low idle. So I don't know why that was unplugged. Maybe they bypassed it, but we can deal with that later. The white with red and the white wire here are the ones that signal comes from the trigger coil. And then you can see this white with blue goes into the ignition coil. And that is what's going to send power to the ignition coil to tell it to. What I want to verify right now, though, is when we turn the ignition switch on, that we are getting voltage, battery voltage, to the CDI. I've got the ground side of my meter grounded to the common ground right here, so I don't have to worry about holding. All I have to do is use the positive lead to test for voltage. And I believe it's the black with red wire here that should send voltage, but I don't honestly know. I'd have to look at the wiring diagram. We're just going to test it for voltage. Got the meter set for DC voltage. I'm going to turn the key on, and I don't know if you can see that, but we have battery voltage, or it looks like our battery charged up nice there. So we have voltage going to the CDI. That's good. And obviously you can see we have ground for the CDI. This brown wire coming straight out to the common ground. So everything should be good there as far as voltage and ground going to the CDI. With that said, really the last thing that we need to test is our ignition coil itself, all the way to the plug. So I'm gonna go ahead and take the plug out, and we'll go over and look at the service manual and see what the ohms reading for the ignition coil itself is. All right, we pulled up the service manual here. You can find most service manuals online in a PDF format if you're lucky. Page 10.9, this shows the ignition system, and we're looking at the ignition coil right here. And you can see on the ignition coil primary winding, which is going to be between the positive terminal that the blue and white wire was, or white with blue wire was on, and then the ground itself, we should have 0.3 ohms. And then if you go from the ground to the spark plug cap on the inside, you should get 10.5. We'll go test those. All right, I've got my meter set to ohms, and you can verify that right here by this little symbol here. I've got the ground side of my meter hooked directly to the ground here. And then I'm going to take the positive side and go to where the signal wire comes in and hold it up to that. And we should get 0.3-ish ohms, and it's right around there. It's probably good. And then we can stick our meter down into there where the spark plug would touch. And I'm reading about 11 ohms, which that's close enough to 10.5. It's probably fine. So we know those things are in good shape just by testing with a meter. They're a little bit off the values, but each meter can be just a little bit different, and if your connections aren't great or whatever. So that's close enough that I'm comfortable with it. If you get a outlandish reading way off, obviously like our pickup coil was, it was supposed to be 520 and we had 24, I believe, ohms. Obviously something's wrong. Also, this black wire that comes down from the kill switch, it also goes into the plug, it plugs into the CDI. You can see it coming out of the connection from the CDI. We can test the kill switch by plugging one side of our meter into this and then setting it on the beeper setting for continuity and touching it to ground. So when you flip your kill switch, it should make a beep sound. Just like that. So we know the engine is killed there. And then if I put it in the run position, the beep will go away. So we know that the kill switch is functioning. Not great, but it is functioning. All right, guys, that's about as far as we can go with this one today. As you saw, the battery did charge up, and it was enough to turn the engine over to do a few tests earlier on in the video, so that is a good thing. I'm going to leave it on the charger till it reaches a max charge. We are waiting. We've ordered a stator, pickup coil, and flywheel. I believe it needs all three of those things. We may have been able to get away with the flywheel with cleaning it up and refinishing some surfaces, but with that one side worn off, it is going to affect the spark a little bit, I believe. So might as well just go ahead and get a used one that's in better shape or a brand new one. The chunks, we found out nothing was torn up in there, so that was probably from a previous explosion that somebody did not clean out well, because the chunks were probably hidden back in those casting gallows where you couldn't see them. So we ran a magnet in there and got all of that out. We tested the ignition coil. We know that that's in good condition by doing ohms readings. What we do not know without it running is if the charging system is working correctly. And as low as the battery, obviously this thing wasn't running though, so it may be. Once we get it running correctly, I will check the charging system. I may make a video on that. I believe this is from I think it's the left headlight, and they used it to put an accessory on too or something, or maybe another light. I'll fix all that too when I do the final video, put all the battery stuff back on. I do know it has good oil in it, good gas, brand new carburetor. Not sure if that's OEM or Amazon. It looks, usually a Kian carb or a Mikuni will have it labeled on that plastic throttle cover, I believe. Try to see if I can see an indicator on that. Looks like it's probably an Amazon carb. I don't see any Kian or Mikuni markings. Brand new air filter. Needs oil on the pre-filter. I'll have to do that. I'll make a note of that. Other than that, really the only thing that would keep it from going once we get everything is, I think we're going to have to adjust the gear selector a little bit to get it reading neutral when it's actually in neutral. And then maybe the valves, maybe you put new tires on it. I think all the wheel bearings and stuff, yeah, it's nice and tight. It's actually in pretty good shape for as old as this thing is. Looks like it got a new rear brake caliper and pads. Make sure all the lights work and all of that. Other than that, yeah, we just got to fix the stator, flywheel, and pickup coil. Plug all this back in. We should have spark and should have a running ATV if we have fuel. I would do a compression check, but I've got all that apart, so I don't want to do that right now. I'll wait till I get that together. Might do a compression test on it just to know what it's sitting at in its current state. I doubt it's been rebuilt. I don't like to see things like this. But like I said, I think that's as far as we can go with this one today. If you like watching videos like this, please subscribe. And I would recommend also, if you like watching videos like this, to check out the channel called 2 Vintage, as in like vintage motorcycle. He's a pretty knowledgeable guy and does a lot of work, videos like this, just fixing junk, whatever it is, he fixes it. Other than that, see y'all later.